It was the kind of night that made even the street lamps look tired, their yellow light bleeding onto the rain-slick pavement like old whiskey on a stained bar top. Inside the station, the air was thick not with smoke or dust, but with the unspoken belief that some people mattered less. Police Chief Raymond Cole leaned back in his leather chair, boots up on the desk, as if the world itself had to wait for his approval. His voice was slow and deliberate, each word dipped in the acid of superiority. "So, Doc," he said, squinting at the man standing across from him, "you think you can just waltz into my town and start poking around like you own the place?" Dr. Elijah Carter stood perfectly still. His hands, which had steadied countless heartbeats in emergency rooms from Chicago to New Orleans, now gripped the strap of his medical bag. He had come here to save a life, a young boy in the holding cell with a ruptured appendix, but the chief hadn't let him past the front desk for the last 40 minutes. Outside, thunder rolled low like a growl from something ancient. Inside, Cole smirked, tilting his head as though Elijah were some curious animal at the zoo. "You people," Cole said, the words landing with a cruel weight, "always think the rules don't apply to you." Elijah's jaw tightened. He had heard that phrase before, in ER waiting rooms, in back alley parking lots after night shifts, from patients too sick to hide their prejudice. But there was something about hearing it here in the supposed heart of law and order that struck differently. "Chief," Elijah said evenly, "if you don't let me through, that boy will die tonight." Cole chuckled, shaking his head. "If he dies, that's on his mama for letting him get mixed up in trouble. Not on me." Lightning flashed, and for a moment, the room seemed carved out of ice. The desk between them might as well have been a wall 10 feet thick. Elijah took a slow breath. "And if it were your son?" Cole's boots thudded to the ground. His pale eyes narrowed into slits. "Careful, document." The rain was hitting harder now, pelting against the window like 1,000 fists. Somewhere in the back, a phone rang once and then went silent. The town outside felt small, and this office felt like the center of a storm far darker than the one flooding the gutters. Elijah thought about the oath he'd taken, the one that didn't care about skin color or zip codes. But standing here, with the chief's sneer slicing through the space between them, he realized that in Cole's town, oaths were just words. Then, just as Cole opened his mouth to deliver another line soaked in contempt, there came a sound faint at first, then sharper. 3 knocks. They weren't polite. They weren't hesitant. They were the kind of knocks that didn't ask for permission. Cole froze, his expression faltering for the first time all night. The rain seemed to pause midair. A voice called from beyond the door, low and steady. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Open up." Cole's smirk faltered into something that looked almost human surprise, maybe, or the thin edge of fear. His hand hovered over the desk like it had forgotten what to do without the certainty of arrogance. Elijah didn't move. He simply watched, his dark eyes reflecting both the fluorescent light and something older, heavier, the kind of patience forged from years of waiting for justice that never seemed to come. Cole cleared his throat, straightening his shirt. "Probably just some lost FedEx guy," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Another 3 knocks, louder this time. Each one made the cheap glass pane in the office door tremble. "Chief Cole." The voice came again, still calm but now edged with authority. "We know you're in there. Open the door." Cole glanced toward the window, as if weighing the drop from the second floor against whatever was waiting outside. Then, realizing Elijah was still watching him, he forced a laugh. "Guess we'd better see what Uncle Sam wants." He strode to the door, trying to reclaim the swagger he'd worn so easily just minutes ago, and yanked it open. Standing there was a man in a dark trench coat, his fedora dripping with rain. The brim shadowed most of his face, but when he lifted it slightly, Elijah saw sharp, assessing eyes, the kind that missed nothing. Behind him stood 2 more agents, 1 woman, 1 man, both with the rigid posture of people who had seen too much to be impressed by a small-town police chief. "Evening, Chief," the man in front said. His badge caught the light for a fraction of a second. "Special Agent Marcus Hale, FBI. We have a federal warrant to execute on these premises." Cole's jaw worked like it was chewing gravel. "A warrant? For my station? What the hell for?" Hale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped inside, the other agents following. The rain smell came with them, fresh and cold, cutting through the stale coffee and paperwork musk of the station. "We'll discuss that in a moment," Hale said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing briefly and knowingly on Elijah. "But first, I'm going to need you to step away from your desk." Cole's face flushed. "This is my department. You can't just walk in here and—" The female agent spoke for the first time, her tone like steel wrapped in silk. "We can't, Chief. And we are." She handed him a folder thick with documents, the top page stamped with a seal and several intimidating lines of legal jargon. Elijah didn't need to read it to know this was real. Cole opened the folder, skimmed the first few lines, then slammed it shut. "This is bullshit. That's not for you to decide," Hale said. "Now, where's your evidence room?" Cole didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Elijah again, and for the first time that night, there was no mockery in his gaze, just calculation. "This guy," Cole said suddenly, jabbing a finger at Elijah, "isn't supposed to be here. He's interfering with police operations." Hale turned to Elijah. "Name?" "Elijah Carter. I'm a physician. I was called here to treat a boy in your holding cell. The chief has been delaying that." The pause after his words felt like someone holding their breath in the dark. Hale's eyes hardened. He turned to the female agent. "Take Dr. Carter to the detainee." Now, Cole started to protest, but the third agent, a tall man with a buzz cut, stepped between them. "You should sit down, Chief. This will go easier for you if you cooperate." Elijah followed the agent down a narrow hallway, the hum of old fluorescent lights overhead. The station felt smaller here, claustrophobic, as if the walls themselves had been holding secrets for years. When they reached the cell, Elijah's chest tightened. The boy, no older than 12, lay curled on the narrow bench, sweat slick on his forehead, lips pale. Elijah knelt beside him immediately, opening his bag. "Hey, buddy. My name's Elijah. I'm here to help you." The boy's eyes flickered open for a second. "Hurts," he whispered. "I know," Elijah said softly. "We're going to fix that." He worked quickly, assessing the boy's condition, giving him something for the pain, and preparing him for immediate transfer to a hospital. The agent with him radioed for an ambulance without hesitation, a stark contrast to the 40 minutes of obstruction Elijah had faced earlier. As they waited, Elijah glanced back toward the hallway. He could hear raised voices, now Cole's, angry and desperate, and Hale's, calm but firm. "You don't know what you're talking about," Cole was saying. "Those files are confidential." "They're evidence," Hale replied, "in an ongoing federal investigation into civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and corruption. We've been building this case for 18 months. Elijah's hands froze for a moment over his medical bag. 18 months. That meant this night had been coming long before he ever set foot in this town. The ambulance arrived, and Elijah rode with the boy to the hospital. He stayed until he knew the surgery was successful, until the boy's mother, her face streaked with tears and relief, clutched his hands and whispered, "Thank you, doctor. Thank you for not giving up." When Elijah returned to the station 2 hours later, the storm had passed. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of wet asphalt, and something else, the sharp tang of change. Cole was sitting in the back of a black SUV, his hands cuffed in front of him. His face was pale, his eyes darting like a man finally realizing the walls had been closing in for years. Hale was standing nearby, speaking quietly to one of his agents. When he saw Elijah, he walked over. "You should know," Hale said. "What happened here tonight wasn't just about you. But your presence, your persistence, it pushed a line we've been tracking for a long time." Elijah nodded slowly. "What happens to him now?" Hale glanced at the SUV. "He'll face federal charges. Civil rights violations. Abuse of power. There's a lot in those files we seized tonight. Enough to make sure he doesn't wear a badge again." Elijah looked past Hale to where the SUV's taillights glowed red against the wet street. Somewhere inside that metal box sat the man who had believed the law was his personal weapon and who now sat silent, stripped of the power he had once wielded so carelessly. As the agents pulled away, Elijah stood alone in the quiet. Somewhere, a clock struck 3. He thought about the boy in the hospital, the mother's trembling gratitude, the storm's brief violence and sudden calm. And he thought about how, sometimes, justice didn't knock softly. Sometimes, it came with rain on its shoulders, 3 sharp knocks on a door, and the weight of every truth that had been waiting to be told. The SUV's taillights disappeared into the wet streets, swallowed by the darkness beyond the station. Elijah stood there for a long moment, rainwater dripping from the brim of his coat, breathing in the strange quiet that follows chaos. It was over. Or at least, this part was. Dr. Carter. Hale's voice cut through the night, steady but softer now. You should come inside. We have coffee, and I think you need to hear a few things. Elijah followed him back into the station. The air inside was still heavy with the residue of tension, but it no longer felt like it was aimed at him. The female agent, her name tag reading R. Vega, handed him a paper cup of coffee. It was bitter, burnt, the kind that could strip paint, but it was hot, and right now, that was enough. Hale leaned against a desk littered with evidence bags and open files. You ever wonder why a man like Cole can get away with this for so long? He asked. Elijah sipped his coffee. I've seen it before. In hospitals. In city halls. People in power build walls not just around themselves, but around the truth. Hale nodded. That's exactly it. And Cole's walls were high. He controlled the town council, had half the county judge's office in his pocket, and anyone who crossed him disappeared. Not literally, but their jobs, their credibility, their lives gone. Vega set a thick manila folder on the desk. This, she said, tapping it, is why we're here. Cole's been under investigation for racially biased policing, illegal detentions, falsifying evidence, and blocking medical care for detainees. Tonight was the first time we had him red-handed with a witness who wouldn't bend. Elijah's hand tightened around his coffee cup. That boy, Hale raised a hand, is going to be fine. We checked in with the hospital. Surgery went well, and he's awake. His mother's already talking to a civil rights lawyer we know. She's got a case now, and with Cole in custody, no one's going to bury it. For the first time all night, Elijah felt something loosen in his chest. But then Hale's gaze sharpened. You should also know Cole had a file on you. Elijah blinked. On me? I've never even been to this town before tonight. That's what makes it interesting, Vega said, sliding the folder toward him. He pulled your name the moment dispatch called for medical assistance. Looks like he ran a full background check before you even got here. He knew who you were, your medical record, your volunteer work, even the testimony you gave in that police misconduct case 2 years ago. Elijah's mind reeled. 2 years ago, he had testified against a police department in Baton Rouge after witnessing officers deny treatment to an injured black teenager during a protest. It had been ugly, public, and personal. He'd received threats for months afterward. He saw me as a threat before I even walked through the door, Elijah murmured. Hale's voice was grim. Exactly. And that's why what happened tonight matters. Men like Cole operate on fear they instill in others, and fear they feel when someone refuses to be intimidated. For a while, none of them spoke. Rain tapped against the station's windows, softer now, like the storm was finally giving up. Vega broke the silence. You heading back to Chicago? Elijah hesitated. Eventually, but I think I'll stick around for a few days. See this through. Make sure that boy and his family aren't left in the dark once the headlines fade. Hale gave a small, approving nod. Good. Just be careful. There are still people here who thought Cole was a hero. They'll be looking for someone to blame. By morning, the news had spread. The local paper's website carried a breaking headline. Small-town police chief arrested by FBI on federal charges. The comments section was a battlefield, half the town cheering, the other half accusing the FBI of targeting good men for political gain. At the diner across from the courthouse, conversations halted when Elijah walked in. Some eyes were curious, others cold. He ordered black coffee and toast, ignoring the whispers behind him. On the corner stool, an old man in a faded Marine Corps cap spoke loud enough for the whole place to hear. Back in my day, you respected the badge. Didn't matter what color the man wearing it was. Another voice, sharper, younger, cut in. Yeah? Tell that to Jamal Harris. Or to the folks they locked up for nothing. The air in the diner thickened. Elijah kept his gaze on the counter, feeling the heat of stares prickling his back. He didn't want to fight, but he wasn't going to slink away, either. Vegas slid into the seat across from him without asking. She was out of uniform now, in a plain gray hoodie, but her eyes were just as watchful. You've made some enemies already, she said. Congratulations. Elijah allowed himself a small, tired smile. Guess that means I'm doing something right. She sipped her coffee. It also means you need to watch your back. We found evidence that Cole had deputies on an unofficial payroll, people who do him favors under the table. We don't know how many of them are still out there. Elijah glanced toward the window, where a pickup truck idled across the street a little too long before pulling away. That night, Elijah visited the hospital again. The boy Malik was propped up in bed, a video game controller in his hands and a cautious smile on his face. "Hey, Doc," he said. "They say you're the reason I'm still here." Elijah sat beside him. "No, Malik. You're the reason you're still here. You fought. I just helped a little." Malik's mother, standing nearby, shook her head. "Don't listen to him, baby. He fought harder than anyone." Her voice softened. "The chief, he wouldn't let Elijah in to see you. I didn't know what to do. I thought I was going to lose you right there." Elijah swallowed hard. "You don't have to think about that anymore. Cole's gone." Malik's eyes darkened. "There's others like him." Elijah didn't deny it. "Yeah, there are. But there's also people like Agent Hale. Like your mom. Like you. And every time someone stands up, it gets harder for guys like Cole to win." Malik studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Back at his hotel later, Elijah couldn't sleep. The storm was gone, but the echoes of the night before still lingered. He thought about Cole in a federal holding cell, about the files Hale had shown him, about how easily things could have ended differently if the FBI hadn't arrived when they did. And he thought about the boy in the cell, the boy in the hospital bed, and the thousands like him across the country, kids whose survival depended on whether the person in power saw them as human. The knock on his door was so soft he almost missed it. He opened it to find Hale, his coat collar turned up against the cold. "Mind if I come in?" Inside, Hale handed him a sealed envelope. "We're leaving town in the morning. Thought you should have this before we go." Elijah opened it to find a single photograph, grainy, black and white, taken from a surveillance camera. It showed Cole in his office, leaning over a table, a stack of cash visible beside a folder marked evidence. "Part of what's going to bury him," Hale said, "but also a reminder. These things only come to light when someone's willing to stand in the way." Elijah studied the photo for a long moment. "You think this changes the town?" Hale shrugged. "Change is slow. Messy. People don't flip overnight. But seeds get planted. And sometimes they grow." 3 months later, the snow had replaced the rain. The courthouse steps were slick with ice, the air sharp with the bite of January. People gathered in clusters, scarves pulled up, breath fogging in the cold as they waited for the verdict. Inside, the trial of former police chief Raymond Cole had played out like a slow, brutal autopsy of his career. Federal prosecutors laid bare the evidence: falsified arrest records, fabricated witness statements, illegal detentions targeting black residents, and obstruction of medical aid, including the night Malik Harris nearly died in his cell. Elijah had testified on the third day. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with the sound of shuffling papers and the creak of wooden benches. Cole sat at the defense table, suit pressed, hair combed back, looking smaller than Elijah remembered, but his eyes were still sharp, still searching for a way to turn the tide. "Dr. Carter," the prosecutor asked, "why did you remain at the station that night, despite the chief's repeated refusal to let you treat Malik Harris?" Elijah kept his voice even. "Because he was a child in critical condition, and because leaving would have meant I was complicit in whatever happened next." The defense attorney tried to twist his words, to paint Elijah as an outsider interfering with police procedure. But the cross-examination fell flat when the FBI agents took the stand, backing Elijah's account with hard evidence. By the time the closing arguments ended, the outcome felt inevitable. Now, as the jury filed back into the courtroom, the air seemed to vibrate with tension. The forewoman stood, holding a folded slip of paper. The judge asked for the verdict. "On the charge of civil rights violations, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of falsifying evidence, guilty." Each word landed like a hammer. Cole's face remained fixed, but his hands clenched against the table. The judge set sentencing for the following month, but everyone knew the years ahead of Cole's life would be spent behind bars. Outside, cameras flashed as reporters swarmed. Some townspeople cheered. Others muttered that it was all a witch hunt. But the most striking thing was the silence from those who had once loudly defended him. They stood apart now, not ready to speak, perhaps realizing the man they'd trusted had built his authority on the backs of the vulnerable. Later that evening, Elijah met Malik and his mother at a small cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse. Malik was stronger now, his cheeks fuller, his laugh quick and easy. "You were there, right?" Malik asked. When they said guilty? Elijah smiled. Yeah, I was there. Malik grinned. Good. Means people saw what really happened. Means maybe they'll think twice next time. His mother reached across the table, taking Elijah's hand. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stayed that night. But I do know this town's different now. Not fixed, but different. The next morning, Elijah packed his bag in the small motel room he'd called home for weeks. Snow fell lightly outside, dusting the street in white. He paused, looking at the photograph Hale had given him. Cole, leaning over the evidence table, cash at his elbow, and slid it into his coat pocket. As he stepped outside, he heard a voice call his name. Turning, he saw Agent Hale, coat collar turned up against the cold. Heading out? Hale asked. Yeah, Elijah said. Time to get back to my real patients. Hale nodded. You made a difference here. Don't let the noise tell you otherwise. Elijah chuckled softly. Noise is part of the job, isn't it? Hale smiled faintly. Sometimes. But sometimes, the silence afterward, that's the real victory. Means they're thinking. Means they're wondering if they were wrong. They shook hands, and Elijah walked toward his car. Driving out of town, he passed the diner where whispers had once followed him to his seat. This time, no one turned. A man in a heavy coat held the door for a woman with 2 kids. Across the street, the courthouse steps were empty under the falling snow. The road opened up, long and winding, leading back toward the city lights far away. Elijah rolled down the window just enough to let the cold air sting his face. He thought of Malik's voice, means maybe they'll think twice next time, and realized that was enough. Not victory in the absolute sense, but movement. And movement, he knew, was how change began. Weeks later, in a hospital ER hundreds of miles away, Elijah found himself facing another situation. A young man brought in by police after a street altercation. The officer at the door, a large man with a deep voice, glanced at Elijah and said, "He's a troublemaker. Don't waste your time." Elijah met his eyes, steady and unblinking. "I decide who gets care in my ER. And everyone does." The officer looked away, muttering something under his breath. But Elijah was already moving, already checking the patient's vitals. As he worked, he realized the memory of Cole's office, the storm, the 3 knocks, would always stay with him, not as a scar, but as a reminder. That night had proved something. Power could be confronted, and arrogance could fall. And sometimes, justice didn't arrive with a roar. Sometimes, it came in the quiet certainty of doing the right thing when no one else would. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.